My son forgot to hang up the phone. I heard words that made my whole body turn still. His voice was soft, slow, and tired, like someone carrying a weight he was afraid to admit. He said, "I'm sending her to a nursing home. It's better this way." Those few words fell on me like cold rain. I sat there with the phone against my ear, unable to move, unable to believe that I had just heard my own child speak about me like that. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the phone with shaking hands. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that maybe I misunderstood, maybe he was talking about someone else. But a mother always knows when the pain is meant for her. And the way his voice sounded, I knew he was talking about me. I could hear his breathing on the other end. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He just sounded exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that makes a person give up on things they once held close. Somehow, that hurt more than anger ever could. It made me feel like I had quietly become a burden he did not know how to carry anymore. I did not speak. I did not cry. I stayed completely silent, because sometimes silence is the only place a mother can hide her heartbreak. I listened as he spoke to someone, maybe his wife, maybe a friend, or maybe he was speaking out loud to himself. Each word he said pressed deeper into my chest. I could feel my heart tightening in a way I had never felt before. All my life, I gave everything I had to him. My days, my nights, my strength, my tears, my happiness. And yet, in that moment, I felt like a guest in my own child's home. Someone who had stayed longer than she should have. Someone who didn't fit anymore. A part of me wanted to hang up the call quickly. Another part wanted to scream and remind him of the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, all the sacrifices I made without ever counting them. But motherhood is strange. Even when your heart is breaking, your love does not stop. So I kept listening. I let his words settle into me, even though each one hurt. When the call finally ended, I kept the phone in my hand for a long time. I stared at it, hoping it could somehow explain how life can change so quickly and so quietly. I whispered to myself, maybe he is right. Maybe this is better. But deep inside, a small voice asked, when did I become too much for my own child? That night, I could not sleep. I lay in silence, thinking about the long journey that brings a mother to a moment like this, wondering how love can stay so strong even when everything else feels like it is slowly falling apart. I woke up the next morning feeling heavier than usual, like someone had quietly placed stones inside my chest while I slept. I moved slowly, almost carefully, as if I might break if I moved too fast. I walked to the kitchen the way I always did, holding the walls for support, listening to the faint sounds of the house waking up. The kettle hissed, the light filled the room, but something inside me felt different. It felt colder, emptier. While pouring tea into my cup, I caught my reflection in the small mirror near the sink. I looked older than I remembered. My hair was thinner, my eyes a little dull, my shoulders slightly curved. I stared at myself for a long moment and wondered, is this the woman he thinks is too much to keep at home? I blinked away the tears and forced myself to look away. My son, Adil, had always been the kind of boy who held my hand tightly when he walked beside me. He used to look at me with big, trusting eyes, as if I was the center of his world. I still remember the first time he called me Amy in a clear, confident voice. My heart had almost burst with joy. I remembered the days when he would run home from school, throw his bag on the sofa, and come straight to the kitchen asking, "Amy, what did you cook today?" Those memories felt warm and alive, but standing in the quiet kitchen now, they felt like echoes from a life that no longer belonged to me. After making tea, I sat near the window and watched the sunlight fall across the yard. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself that my son didn't mean harm. That maybe he said those words out of stress, out of frustration. I tried to believe that he still loved me, even if that love had changed its shape over the years. But the truth kept whispering in the back of my mind. He said it. He really said it. Around noon, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My daughter-in-law, Samra, walked past my door, speaking on the phone. Her heels clicked lightly on the floor. I could hear bits of her conversation, laughter, quick sentences, her usual bright tone. She didn't stop by my room that morning, which was unusual. She usually checked if I needed anything, but maybe she was busy. Or maybe she knew about the phone call. Adil came home earlier than usual that day. I heard the front door close and his familiar footsteps moving through the house. For a moment, my heart softened. Even after everything, the sound of my son coming home still brought me a quiet comfort. He came to my room after a few minutes. "Amy, how are you feeling?" he asked gently. His voice sounded normal, too normal. I wondered if he knew I had heard him last night. I wondered if he was speaking like this to cover the truth. I forced a small smile. "I'm fine, Beta. Just a little tired." He sat down on the chair beside my bed, leaned forward, and rested his elbows on his knees. I noticed he avoided eye contact. There was something heavy inside him too, something he was hiding. "How was your day?" I asked. "Busy," he replied quietly. "A lot on my mind." I nodded, even though I already knew what was on his mind. There was a long pause. It felt like we were both waiting for each other to say something, but neither of us knew where to begin. After a few minutes, he left the room, saying he had some work to finish. When the door closed behind him, I finally let myself breathe again. That whole day, I moved around the house with a strange mix of fear and acceptance. I folded my clothes carefully, the way I always did. I watered the plants in the small balcony. I sat in the living room for a while, listening to the clock ticking on the wall. Every second felt like it was counting down to something I didn't want to face. I kept asking myself the same questions. When did I become a problem? When did I stop being needed? When did my presence become difficult for him? Later in the evening, when the house grew quiet and the shadows grew longer, I looked around at the walls, the furniture, the small decorations that had become familiar to me. This place had never really been mine. It was my son's house, his world, his life. I was just a visitor who had stayed long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. A strange thought passed through my mind. Maybe I should leave before he asks me to. But then my heart tightened, because where would I go? I had no parents left, no siblings close enough to take me in. My husband had passed away years ago. The only real family I had was my son. And now, even that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. That night, when everyone went to sleep, I stayed awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling. I remembered my life before all this, the small house I shared with my husband, the laughter we used to share, the sacrifices we made to give Adil a better future. We always believed that our son would take care of us in return, not out of duty, but out of love. I wondered if my husband would be disappointed seeing me like this, old, fragile, unsure of where I belonged. My thoughts kept returning to the moment I heard Adil say those words. The memory played again and again, like a sad song my heart didn't know how to turn off. Hours passed, but sleep never came. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt a strange calmness. Not peace, just acceptance. I realized that life sometimes teaches us hard lessons through quiet nights. I stood up slowly, walked to the mirror again, and whispered to myself, maybe this is what growing old feels like. Maybe this is how a heart learns to let go. But even as I said it, my chest ached with a deep, silent pain, the kind only a mother knows. 7. The days that followed passed quietly, but the silence between me and my son grew heavier. It was like walking through a house filled with invisible walls. Everyone moved around me, but no one really saw me. I tried to keep my feelings hidden, but everything around me reminded me of the words I had heard. Adil became more distant than usual. He spoke to me with kindness, yes, but the warmth was missing. It felt like someone had turned down the light in his voice. He asked if I needed anything, but his eyes kept drifting away, as if he was thinking about something else, something difficult. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room while Samra dusted the shelves. She didn't look at me for the longest time. She moved quietly, her steps careful, her face thoughtful. After a while, she finally spoke. "Amy, do you want tea?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but there was something hidden behind it, hesitation, maybe guilt. I nodded. "Yes, Beta. Thank you." She walked to the kitchen, and as she left, I heard her sigh softly, the way someone sighs when they are carrying a weight they don't want to talk about. I wondered if she was tired of taking care of me. I wondered if she was the one who suggested the nursing home. Or maybe she simply agreed because she didn't know what else to do. When she brought the tea back, She placed the cup beside me and said, "If you need anything, just tell me." I smiled gently, but inside I felt a sadness I could not explain. She was trying, I could see that. But it also felt like she was preparing herself for something. Preparing for a change. As the days went on, small things began to happen that made me feel even more like a burden. Once, I heard Adil and Samra talking in their room. Their voices were low, but I caught a few lines. "We can't go on like this," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "But what choice do we have?" A choice. They were discussing choices about me. But I was not part of those choices. Another day, I accidentally dropped a glass in the kitchen. It slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I froze, staring at the broken pieces. It felt like I was staring at my own life, cracked, scattered, hard to pick up. Adil came rushing in. "Amy, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said softly, bending down slowly. He stopped me gently. No, leave it. I'll clean it." But the way he said it was different this time. Not irritated, not angry, just tired. It was the kind of tiredness that comes from worry mixed with responsibility. The kind that makes a person want to find a simpler way to live. Later that week, something small happened, but it felt like a big sign. I walked into the kitchen and saw Samra rearranging things on the upper shelves. "I'm lowering some of the plates," she said. "So you don't have to reach so high." I knew she meant well, but the truth behind her words was clear. I was no longer able to do simple things safely. That thought settled deep into my heart. That night, when Adil returned home, he came to my room again. He stood quietly near the doorway before speaking. "Amy, do you need anything? Are you comfortable?" I nodded. "Yes, Beta. I'm fine." He hesitated. "You're sure?" I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was pale, his shoulders heavy, his eyes tired. My son, the boy I raised with so much hope, was drowning in responsibilities, and now I was part of the weight pressing down on him. I wanted to tell him the truth. I had heard everything. I knew what he was planning. I knew he was thinking about sending me away. But the words did not come out. My tongue felt heavy. My heart felt fragile. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want him to feel guilty. So I said nothing. After he left, the tears I had been holding for days finally came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears slipping down my cheeks while I sat in the dark. I pressed a hand to my lips to keep myself from sobbing. I didn't want anyone to hear me cry. The next morning, I tried to make myself useful around the house. I helped fold clothes, but my hands shook. I tried to sweep the floor, but my back hurt. Even sitting too long made my joints ache. Growing old felt like slowly losing parts of yourself, your strength, your independence, your place in the world. One afternoon, I overheard something that made everything even clearer. Adil was speaking to someone on the phone in the living room. His voice was calm, but the words carried sharp edges. "I just want her to be safe," he said. "Her health is getting weaker. We can't leave her alone." "Yes, I know the place. I visited it last year." "No, she doesn't know yet." My heart trembled. He visited a nursing home? Last year? He had been thinking about this for a long time. I walked back to my room slowly, feeling as if the floor under my feet was slipping away. Everything around me looked the same bed, the same curtains, the same small table by the window, but the air felt different. The colors felt duller. The room felt smaller. That night, I sat in my chair and let my thoughts run freely. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't safe alone. Maybe my trembling hands, my slow steps, my weak eyes were signs that I needed more help than they could give. Maybe sending me to a nursing home wasn't about removing me from their lives. Maybe it was about making their lives manageable again. But even if all of that was true, the pain didn't lessen. Because no matter how gently someone says it, being sent away still feels like being unwanted. The conflict grew inside me between acceptance and heartbreak, between understanding and feeling abandoned. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or how to face the future. All I knew was that a storm was coming, and I could already feel the wind changing. A few days later, the moment I had been quietly fearing finally arrived. It came silently, without warning, like a soft knock on a closed door that you already know must be opened. It was late afternoon. The sun was low, casting a warm, orange glow across the living room. I was sitting on the sofa, knitting slowly, my fingers moving without energy. The yarn kept slipping from my hands, and I had to start the same row again and again. I heard the main door open. Adil entered the house, but this time his footsteps were different, slower, heavier, like each step carried a decision he did not want to make. I pretended not to notice. I kept my eyes on the yarn even though my heart was beating fast. He walked toward me, then stopped a few steps away. "Amy," he said softly. I looked up. His eyes were filled with something I had never seen in him before: guilt, confusion, sadness, and a kind of helplessness that made him look like a little boy again. "Yes, Beta," I replied. He swallowed hard. "Can we talk for a moment?" I nodded. "Of course." He sat down across from me, his hands clasped tightly together. He took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, as if trying to steady himself. "Amy, something has been on my mind for a long time," he began. I felt my fingers tremble, but I hid them under the edge of my shawl. "I've noticed you're getting weaker," he said gently. "Your hands shake, your knees hurt, and you get tired so fast." I nodded quietly. It was the truth. He continued, "Samra and I worry about you. A lot. We worry when you walk alone, when you try to cook. Even when you take a bath, we fear you might slip." I listened without interrupting. His words felt like small pins, sharp and careful, piercing through the little strength I had left. He looked down at his hands. "Amy, we don't want anything to happen to you." There was a long pause, one that stretched into the air like a line that neither of us wanted to cross. Finally, he said it. "I think it's time we moved you somewhere safer. Somewhere you can get proper care. Somewhere they know how to help people your age." I felt the room tilt slightly. Even though I had expected it, hearing it directly still hurt like a sudden cut. He lifted his eyes and looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "You want to send me away?" His face tightened. "Amy, it's not like that. It's not sending you away. It's giving you care." "A nursing home?" I whispered. He hesitated for 3 long seconds. "Yes." That one word broke something inside me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, the quiet of something gently falling apart. I looked away, not trusting myself to meet his eyes. My throat tightened, and I blinked rapidly to keep the tears inside. "Amy, please understand," he said, moving closer. "It's not because we don't want you here. It's just, we don't know how to take care of you the way professionals can." I nodded slowly, pretending to understand everything, pretending to accept it. But deep inside, a storm raged silently. Was I really that helpless now? Was I such a burden that my own son felt he needed strangers to look after me? Was love no longer enough? He continued speaking, trying to explain, trying to make it sound gentle. "We found a really good place. They have nurses, doctors, clean rooms. You won't be alone. You'll meet people your age. You'll be safe." Safe. I repeated that word in my mind again and again. Safe. A word people often use when they don't know how to say the harsher truth. After a few minutes, he asked softly, "Amy? Say something. Please." I lifted my eyes to him and managed a faint smile. "What do you want me to say, Beta?" I asked. "You have already decided." He shook his head. No, I want you to agree willingly. I want you to feel okay about it." I looked at him with tired eyes. "Even if I say no, will it change anything?" His silence gave me the answer. He wanted my permission. But he didn't need it. He had already chosen the path. I folded my hands together and whispered, "When do you want me to go?" His face fell, as if he didn't expect me to ask so directly. "Maybe next week. They have a room available." A room. Like I was a guest. A temporary piece of furniture. Adil reached out and held my hand. His fingers were warm, firm, gentle. "Amy, I promise I'll visit you every week. Maybe twice a week. And you'll have your own space there. Comfortable, peaceful." Peaceful. Another soft word that tried to hide the reality underneath. I nodded slowly. "If that is what you think is best." He squeezed my hand. "It's not just what I think. It's what I feel is safe for you." My eyes filled with tears, but I blinked them away before they could fall. I didn't want him to see my pain. I didn't want him to feel guilt. I didn't want him to regret his decision. He was my son. And even when he broke my heart, I still wanted to protect him. After our conversation, he left the room quietly. The moment the door closed behind him, the tears I had been holding back finally escaped. They fell silently onto my shawl, one after another, like small pieces of my soul being released. I covered my face with my hands. For the first time in many years, I felt truly alone, not because there were no people around me, but because the one person I loved the most no longer knew how to keep me close. That night, I packed my things. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew the time had come. As I folded my clothes, I touched each piece gently, remembering the years I wore them, the festivals, the winters, the moments that made me who I am. With each item I packed, a memory returned, warm, bright, painful. The emptiness in my suitcase felt like the emptiness growing inside my heart. By the time I closed the zipper, I realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. Letting go is harder than holding on. But sometimes, you have no choice. When I look back now, I realize that loneliness does not arrive in one loud moment. It comes quietly. It comes in small ways, like when your chair at the dining table is no longer pulled out for you. It comes when the family sits in the living room but forgets to ask if you want to join them. It comes when your favorite cup disappears into the back of a cabinet and no one bothers to bring it out again. One evening, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, folding my clothes slowly. The window was half open, and the soft wind was touching my face. I don't know why, but I felt like crying without any reason. Maybe it was because I could feel myself slipping out of their world, little by little. I could see it in the way they walked past me without looking. I could hear it in the silence after I spoke. I could feel it in my son's tired tone. That night, I walked outside to the small balcony. It was dark, but the moon was gentle. I whispered into the air, maybe I am becoming a burden. Saying those words out loud made my heart shake. I held the railing tightly, afraid that I would fall not from the height, but from the weight of my own thoughts. The next morning, something small happened, but it hurt deeply. I was pouring tea when my daughter-in-law came into the kitchen. She opened a cabinet, took out a new jar of tea leaves, and placed it on the shelf. Then she said quietly, "Amy, don't touch this one. I'll handle the tea from now on." Her voice wasn't rude, but it wasn't kind either. It felt like she was slowly taking away the little things that made me feel useful. I nodded, but inside, something cracked. When you stop being needed, you stop feeling alive. That is how it felt. Later that day, I overheard her telling my son, "She's getting forgetful. We have to think long term." I stood in the hallway, holding the edge of the wall, my fingers shaking. Forgetful? I remembered everything, the years I raised him, the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the sacrifices I made so he could study, work, and live comfortably. How could they forget all of that so easily? But I did not say anything. I stayed silent. Silence was my only protection now. At night, when the house was asleep, I opened the drawer of my bedside table. Inside were old pictures, me holding my son as a baby, me cooking at our old home, me smiling with his father beside me. I touched the pictures and closed my eyes. Where did that life go? I whispered. As days passed, my place in the house grew smaller. My voice grew quieter. My heart grew heavier. And all the while, I kept telling myself, maybe tomorrow will be better, even though a part of me knew that tomorrow was only going to bring something worse, something I was not ready for. The next morning, I woke up with a strange heaviness in my chest, as if something was warning me. I quietly went to the kitchen to make my tea. My hands were steady, my steps were slow, but my heart felt like it was waiting for bad news. My daughter-in-law was already there, packing a small lunchbox for my son. She looked tired, but when she saw me, she forced a smile. "Good morning, Amy," she said politely, the kind of polite that has no warmth. I smiled back, though my smile felt thin. "Good morning, Beta." I took out my cup, the old one I loved, but it slipped slightly from my hand. Only slightly, it didn't fall, but she turned quickly and said, "Amy, please be careful." Her tone wasn't angry, but it held a quiet frustration, the kind that tells you someone has already made up their mind about you. My son came into the kitchen a minute later. He looked tired too, or maybe just stressed. He barely glanced at me while tightening his tie. I wanted to say something, anything, just to feel like a mother again. But before I could speak, my daughter-in-law said softly, she almost dropped her cup again. My son sighed. A deep sigh. The kind that makes you feel like you are the problem. He didn't look at me when he said, "We'll talk about it later." I stood there quietly, holding my cup, trying to pretend I didn't hear, trying to pretend it didn't hurt. They left for work soon after, and the house became quiet, a heavy, sad kind of quiet. I walked slowly to the living room and sat down. I looked around at the furniture, the curtains, the family pictures. Everything in that house belonged to me once. Now I felt like a guest, or worse, a stranger. Around noon, the phone rang. I didn't want to answer it because my hands were shaking, but the ringing felt too loud in the empty house. I picked it up. It was my son. "Amy, are you okay at home?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I am fine." There was a long silence. He didn't ask what I ate, how I felt, or if I needed anything. Instead, he said, "We need to discuss something important tonight." My breath stopped for a moment. Important. The word felt cold. Strong. Final. After he hung up, I sat down slowly. My hands were trembling, and I pressed them together to make them still. I felt a chill running through me even though the house was warm. Something inside me knew. Something inside me whispered, "This is it. The day you feared is coming." That evening, when they returned home, they were unusually quiet. They didn't argue. They didn't talk much. They just exchanged looks. Looks I wasn't supposed to understand. Looks that made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I kept waiting for them to speak. To tell me what they had decided. To tell me what my future was going to be. And when my son finally sat beside me, his voice soft but distant, I knew. The real breaking point was only a few hours away. That night, after dinner, the air inside the house felt heavy. My son and daughter-in-law were whispering in the kitchen. Every few seconds, I could hear their voices stop, as if they didn't want me to hear anything. The silence between their whispers felt louder than the whispers themselves. I sat on the sofa, pretending to watch the television, though the screen was blurry. My eyes stayed on the moving images, but my mind was preparing for something painful. I didn't know what the exact words would be, but I knew they would hurt. After a few minutes, my son walked into the living room. He looked nervous. He sat beside me, not too close, almost as if he didn't want to touch me. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face serious. My heart was beating slowly, but each beat felt heavy, like a stone dropping inside my chest. My son cleared his throat. "Amy." He paused. That pause was enough to break me. "Yes, Beta," I said softly. He looked down at his hands. "We've been thinking. Things are getting difficult. You're alone at home all day. We worry about you." I nodded even though I knew this wasn't the real reason. When children say they worry, it often means they want distance, not closeness. He continued, "We think it might be better if you stay, somewhere where you can get proper care." My breath stopped. My throat tightened painfully. I looked at him slowly. "What do you mean by somewhere else?" He didn't look at me. "A nursing home, Amy. Only for safety. Only for comfort." For a moment, the world became silent. So silent that I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and aching. I felt as if the floor beneath me was disappearing. I tried to smile, but my lips were shaking. "A nursing home?" I repeated, as if saying the words softly would make them less sharp. My daughter-in-law stepped forward. "It will be good for you. They take care of everything. You won't have to worry. We'll visit when we can." Her voice was calm, but it had no softness, no warmth, no understanding. I looked back at my son. My eyes were filling with tears, but I forced myself to stay calm. "So you want me to leave?" I asked quietly. He finally looked at me, but only for a second. "No, Amy, not leave. Just stay somewhere safer. For your own good. For my own good." Those 4 words cut deeper than any blade. I folded my hands in my lap. My voice was barely a whisper. "When do you want me to go?" He hesitated. Then he said the words that broke whatever was left of me. Soon, Amy. Maybe, in a few days. A few days. After everything. After every sacrifice. After every prayer I made for him. After every night I stayed awake for him. After every moment I lived for him. I nodded slowly, even though it felt like my soul was shaking inside me. Okay, I said quietly. If that is what you want. But inside, a storm of pain was rising, silent, deep, and heavy. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of their TV in the other room, thinking about what it meant to be unwanted in the home you once built with your own hands. And I kept asking myself one question over and over. How did I become a burden to the very child I raised with my whole life? That night felt endless. I lay awake for hours, replaying every moment of my life, searching for the mistake I must have made. Was I too soft? Too giving? Too quiet? Or was motherhood simply a path where you love without expecting anything back, and sometimes you receive nothing in return? The house was silent, but inside my chest, my heart felt loud, too loud. Every beat reminded me that the life I knew was ending soon. Every breath felt heavy, as if I was borrowing air from a place where I no longer belonged. In the early morning, before the sun even rose, I slowly sat up. My eyes were tired, and my hands were cold. I walked to the living room, where everything looked normal, the sofa, the table, the photos on the wall. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not to me. I touched one family photo gently. It was a picture of my son on his wedding day. I remembered how proud I felt, how full my heart was. I had prayed that day that his home would always be filled with love. I didn't know then that years later, that same home would push me out quietly, politely, but painfully. Around breakfast time, they woke up. My daughter-in-law entered the kitchen first. She looked surprised to see me awake. Amy, you're up early, she said, her voice flat. I nodded and smiled. Yes, Beta. I couldn't sleep. My son walked in a few minutes later. He looked tired, maybe from guilt, maybe from worry, or maybe from the weight of a decision he had already made. He sat down at the table. Amy, are you okay? Yes, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. I am fine. Inside, I was breaking, but on the outside, I stayed calm. A mother learns to hide her pain early in life. After breakfast, he said quietly, I spoke to someone today. There is a place, a nice one. They have room. Room. That word felt like someone placing me inside a box, neat, closed, out of the way. I kept my eyes lowered. When do we go see it? He hesitated. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. No time to breathe. No time to prepare. No time to accept that my home was no longer mine. The rest of the day passed in slow silence. My daughter-in-law moved around the house, organizing things, making small stacks, sorting items. I watched her touch my belongings, deciding which things I would take and which things would stay. It felt like I was watching someone pack away my life. At one point, she held up an old shawl of mine. Do you still need this? She asked casually. I took it from her gently. Yes, I replied. This one. I keep with me. She shrugged and walked away. She didn't know that the shawl was a gift from my late husband. She didn't know what memories were stitched into its threads. She didn't ask. She didn't care. As evening came, I sat quietly near the window, watching the fading light. My heart felt heavy, but like every mother, I tried to find a small piece of strength somewhere inside me. Maybe this is just another test. Maybe this is life teaching me something about letting go, even when it hurts. But then, when the house became quiet, an unexpected moment arrived, something that changed everything. Something I did not expect. Something that made my heart stop. And that moment would come from a single phone call. He took a deep breath. I heard my mother talking to someone. They said your son is planning to send you to a nursing home. My heart felt like it stopped for a moment. So it was true. He had told others before he told me. He had shared my fate with the world before sharing it with his own mother. I swallowed hard. Yes, Beta. They told me yesterday. Samir's voice suddenly broke. Amy, how can they? After everything you have done. I stayed silent. It hurt too much to speak. Finally, I whispered, maybe this is what God has written for me. No, he said firmly. You don't deserve this. You deserve love. You deserve respect. Hearing those words made my eyes fill instantly. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to me with such warmth. Amy, listen, he continued. If you ever feel unsafe or unwanted, you can come here. To my home. My wife and I will take care of you. You are not a burden to us. My throat tightened so much I couldn't speak. I pressed the phone to my ear and closed my eyes, letting his kindness wash over me like a warm wave. Thank you, Beta, I finally whispered. Thank you for thinking of me. He said softly, your family. And family doesn't throw away its elders. For the first time in days, I felt something inside me soften. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. Maybe a small light trying to return. After a few more minutes, we ended the call. I placed the phone on my lap and stared at the wall in front of me. A single tear rolled down my cheek, slow and warm. I whispered to myself, at least someone still remembers me. But what I didn't know was that the real storm, the moment that would change everything, was still waiting for me later that night. A moment that would come from another phone call. A phone call I was never supposed to hear. That night, after my call with Samir, I sat quietly on my bed. The room felt cold, even though the air was still. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and tried to calm my thoughts. His words had given me strength, but the pain inside me was still alive, still burning softly. I had just placed my phone on the side table when I heard my son's phone ring in the living room. I didn't mean to listen. I didn't want to listen. But the walls were thin, and their voices traveled easily through the house. At first, I heard only muffled sounds. Then I heard my son's voice, tired, irritated, but trying to stay calm. Yes, Ma. I know. I already told you, he said. My heart tightened. He was speaking to my elder sister, Samir's mother. I leaned slightly toward the door, not to spy, but because my heart was begging for answers. Yes, we've made the decision, he continued. We can't manage her anymore. Each word felt like a stone thrown into my chest. Then my daughter-in-law spoke in the background. Tell her it's for the best. Tell her Amy needs full-time care. My son repeated it into the phone, word for word. It's for the best. She needs proper care now. There was a long pause. I could not hear what my sister said, but I could imagine her shock, her hurt. She had known me my entire life. She knew I wasn't helpless. She knew I wasn't a burden. Then my son said something I will never forget, something that struck me like lightning. Ma, please understand, she's becoming difficult. Difficult. The word echoed inside me like a blow. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop the sound of my breath. Tears filled my eyes instantly. I didn't even realize I was shaking. Difficult? Was I difficult when I raised him alone after his father passed away? Was I difficult when I worked day and night so he could study? Was I difficult when I cooked, cleaned, and prayed for him every single day? Was I difficult when I gave up my entire world to build his? He continued speaking to my sister, unaware that every word was stabbing straight into my heart. No, Ma, she doesn't do much anymore. She forgets things. She drops things. She's getting old. His voice softened for a moment. I can't handle this. I have my own life. My own responsibilities. My daughter-in-law's voice rose again. Tell her it's final. We already booked the place. My son repeated it. It's final. We booked the nursing home. My legs felt weak. I couldn't stand anymore. I slowly sat on the floor beside my bed, leaning against the wall. My tears fell without sound. My hands covered my face. Booked. Already decided. Already planned. And I was the last one to know. Then something happened, something I wasn't expecting. My son forgot to end the call. I heard the beep sound, but the call didn't disconnect. My sister was still on the line. And suddenly, my son sighed heavily and said words he never meant for anyone else to hear. We just want our freedom back. Freedom. From me. From a mother. In that moment, I felt something inside me break in a way that can never be repaired. My sister gasped on the line, realizing he had not hung up. Hello? Hello? You're still connected, she said loudly. My son panicked and quickly cut the call, but the damage was done. The truth had been said. The truth had been heard. I slowly lifted myself from the floor and sat on the bed again. My tears kept falling, unstoppable, like a long, silent rain. That night, for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. Not because I had no one, but because the people I loved the most no longer loved me the way I loved them. That night, after hearing those words, "We just want our freedom back," something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, deep and sharp, but my tears had slowed. I sat on the bed with my shawl wrapped tightly around me, trying to hold myself together. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. But sometime later, I wiped my face and looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room. An old woman stared back at me, tired eyes, soft wrinkles, silver hair. But there was something else too. A quiet strength I had forgotten I had. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my sister. "Amy, I heard everything. You are not going anywhere. Not to any nursing home. You can come to us. Come tomorrow. We will take care of you with love." I stared at her words, my hands trembling. Someone still wanted me. Someone still cared. Before I could reply, another message came. "Just say yes. We will come in the morning to pick you up. Don't tell them." I covered my mouth with my hand, overwhelmed. Tears filled my eyes again, but these tears were different. They weren't from pain. They were from the comfort of knowing that I was not alone in this world after all. But I didn't reply immediately. I couldn't. Something inside me whispered softly, "Wait. Think. This is your life. This is your decision." I sat there silently, staring at the wall, listening to the clock ticking, slow, steady, almost comforting. Then I heard footsteps outside my door. My son's voice. "Amy, are you awake?" I quickly wiped my face and straightened my shawl. "Yes, Beta. I'm awake." He opened the door slightly and looked inside. His face was neutral, maybe a little tense. "We have to leave early tomorrow. The appointment at the nursing home is at 10. His words were simple, but they cut deep. I nodded gently. "Okay." He didn't stay. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't even step inside. He just closed the door and walked away. After he left, I finally picked up my phone and typed, "Yes, I'll come." I sent it. Almost instantly, my sister replied, "Good. Pack only what you need. Leave the rest. Your peace is more important than things." I placed the phone beside me. My heart was beating fast, not from fear now, but from a strange courage rising inside me. I stood up slowly and opened my cupboard. I touched my clothes gently, choosing only a few simple things. One dress. One sweater. My shawl. A small box of memories, old photos, a letter from my husband, a few things that belonged to my mother. I packed them quietly inside a small bag. As I worked, a thought kept repeating inside me. I am not being thrown out. I am choosing to leave with dignity. When I finished packing, I sat on the bed again and looked around the room. The room where I had laughed. The room where I had cried. The room where I had lived like a guest in my own home. And I whispered to myself, "I gave you everything, Beta. But now I must give something to myself too." The house was silent again, but I was no longer afraid of the silence. Because for the first time in a long time, I had a plan. And I had somewhere to go. Tomorrow would not be the day they took me to a nursing home. Tomorrow would be the day I walked away on my own terms. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning from side to side, and with every movement, it felt like a piece of my heart was breaking. The house was silent, too silent. This was the same house that once echoed with laughter, with the sound of my son coming home tired but smiling, with the little footsteps of the children, and with moments of love and unity. But now it felt as if the walls themselves had stopped breathing. I lay there wondering why everything had changed so much, why the home that once needed me now felt like it wanted me gone. I looked at my hands, those wrinkled hands that had cooked, cleaned, cared, held, protected, and sacrificed for years. Yet today, it felt like none of that mattered to anyone, especially my daughter-in-law, who seemed more distant with every passing day. Sometimes I wondered if I really had become old, if maybe my presence truly felt like a burden. Maybe I walked too slowly now, maybe I talked too softly, maybe I didn't fit into their fast, modern life anymore. But then another part of my heart whispered, a mother is never a burden. A mother is a shelter, a shade that keeps the home cool and safe. And yet, it was painful to feel that my shade no longer mattered. As the night grew deeper, my chest felt heavier. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the days I had spent raising my son, all the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, all the prayers I whispered for his future. I thought of how he used to hold my hand when he was small and say, "Amy, don't ever leave me." But now I wasn't sure if he even remembered those days. I kept asking myself, does my son want this too? Does he think I am the problem? My heart refused to believe it. My son was kind. He had never spoken to me harshly, never raised his voice. So how did things reach this point? Why did I suddenly feel like a stranger in the home I built with my own hands? But the truth was waiting just ahead, and I didn't know that the coming day would change everything forever. The next morning, I woke up with tired eyes and a heart that felt even heavier than the night before. As I stepped out of my room, I could hear my daughter-in-law's voice in the kitchen, low, hurried, and slightly irritated. I paused for a moment, thinking maybe I should help, maybe my presence would make things easier, but before I could take another step, I heard her say something that froze me in place. She said, "I can't live like this anymore. Your mother, she makes everything difficult. We need space. We need our own life." My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I felt the ground slip from beneath my feet. I didn't know if my son was responding or staying silent, but the fact that those words were spoken, about me, in my own house, shattered something inside me. I quietly stepped back before they could notice I was there, my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of the wall. All I had ever tried to do was make life easier for them, not harder. But somehow, without knowing when or how, I had become the problem. I went to the courtyard and sat on the old wooden chair, the same one where I used to feed my son when he was little, the same place where he once sat beside me every evening after school. I looked at the sky, wondering how love turns into distance, how care becomes a burden, how the home you build transforms into a place where you feel like a guest. My heart whispered, maybe I should leave. Maybe that's what they want. But another part of me cried, where would I go? This is my home. My memories live here. Yet the voices from the kitchen kept ringing in my ears, especially the words, "We need space." I wiped my tears with the edge of my dupatta before anyone could see. A mother never wants her child to feel trapped because of her. Even in pain, she chooses sacrifice. When my son finally came out, he avoided meeting my eyes. That told me everything I needed to know. His silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. And in that moment, I realized that a decision had already been made, one that would soon change my entire life. Later that evening, I found my son sitting in the living room, staring at his phone with a worried expression. I quietly walked past him, but he stopped me with a soft, almost hesitant voice, saying, "Amy, can we talk?" His tone was gentle, but there was a weight in it, a heaviness I had never heard before. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. For a moment, he could not look at me, and when he finally lifted his eyes, I saw guilt hiding behind them. He cleared his throat and said, "Amy, you know I love you, but things have been difficult. The house feels tense. She feels uncomfortable. I just want peace, Amy." His words were cautious, as if he knew they were going to hurt me. And they did deeply. Each sentence felt like a small needle, gently piercing the heart of a mother who had already spent the whole day gathering her broken pieces. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand, pretending to agree, pretending that I was strong enough to swallow the pain. Inside, my chest tightened, and I felt my pulse slowly trembling through my fingers. I asked quietly, "What do you want?" His answer came after a long, painful pause. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while. Just until things settle. Maybe at Auntie Farida's house, or maybe a care home." His voice broke slightly when he said the last two words, but he didn't take them back. He didn't correct himself. He didn't say he didn't mean it. He let them sit in the air like a cruel truth waiting to land on my heart. A care home. For me. His mother. The same woman who had held him through fevers, stood by him during exams, prayed for him every night, and gave her entire life without asking for anything. My hands trembled, but I kept them hidden in my lap. I took a long breath and forced a small smile, one that probably looked more painful than peaceful. I whispered, "If that's what you want, then okay." He looked relieved, not sad. Relieved. And that hurt even more than his words. At that moment, I realized that sometimes a mother's presence becomes invisible the day her children stop needing her. And sometimes, the deepest heartbreak comes not from harsh words, but from quiet decisions made by the very people you love most. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling as the shadows moved slowly across the room. Every breath felt heavy, as if my chest was holding the weight of years I had never cried for. I kept replaying my son's words, "maybe a care home," over and over again, each time cutting a little deeper. I tried telling myself that he didn't mean harm, that he was just trying to keep peace in his home, that he was stuck between his mother and his wife. But no matter how much I tried to soften the truth stayed harsh. The truth stayed cold. A mother does not expect her child to carry her forever, but she does hope, just once he would say, "Amy, stay. We'll work it out." But he didn't. And that silence told me that my place in this house had already started fading long ago. Early in the morning, I quietly began folding my clothes. The sound of the cupboard doors opening felt louder than usual, like each click echoed my own heartbreak. I placed my neatly folded dupattas in the bag, the same ones I once wore proudly during school events, weddings, and celebrations. Now they felt like memories I was packing away, memories that had nowhere left to live. As I folded the last shawl, I paused and held it close to my chest. It still carried the faint scent of my old garden, the roses I once took care of. I wondered who would water them now, who would talk to them like I used to. I wondered if the house would miss me just a little, or if it would simply forget I ever lived there. When I stepped out into the hallway, my son stood there, looking nervous and unsure. My daughter-in-law stood behind him, avoiding my eyes. Her silence was a confirmation that this was exactly what she wanted. My son said softly, "Amy, don't worry. It's just temporary." His voice trembled, but only a little. I wanted to ask him something, "Would you still send me if it wasn't temporary?" But I swallowed the words. A mother never asks questions that might hurt her child. She keeps her pain inside, even when it is tearing her apart. So I simply nodded and whispered, "I understand." As he carried my small bag to the door, I looked around the house one last time, the kitchen where I cooked thousands of meals, the living room where I once waited for him to come home from school, the walls that held the laughter of his childhood. I placed my hand gently on the doorframe, the way I used to when blessing the home. This time, though, it felt like a goodbye, one I never imagined giving. And just as we stepped outside, the morning breeze touched my face, carrying a coldness I had never felt before, as if the world knew I was leaving the place that once meant everything to me. As we drove toward the care home, I watched the world pass by through the car window. The trees, the small shops, the people walking on the footpaths, all of it looked strangely distant, as if I was seeing life from the outside for the first time. My son kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He didn't say much, and I didn't ask anything. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. I kept staring at his face through the reflection in the window, searching for the little boy I once carried in my arms. But all I saw was a grown man, torn between his mother and his responsibilities, and perhaps between his love and his household peace. I understood his struggle, but understanding did not make the pain any smaller. When we reached the care home, the building stood quietly at the edge of a long road. It wasn't a bad place. It looked clean, calm, almost peaceful. But it wasn't home. It didn't smell like my kitchen. It didn't echo my memories. A woman at the front desk smiled gently and said, "Welcome, Auntie. Don't worry, you'll be comfortable here." Her words were kind, but they felt like a soft cloth pressed over a deep wound, a wound that was still bleeding inside me. My son carried my bag and followed behind me, looking around nervously. I could feel him wanting to leave quickly before his emotions betrayed him. As the staff member showed us the room, a small but neat space with a bed, a table, and a window facing the garden, I stood quietly, taking it all in. My son finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Amy, please try to understand. This is only until things get better at home." I nodded slowly, even though deep inside, a small voice whispered that temporary often becomes permanent when a mother leaves her son's house. I touched his arm softly and said, "It's all right, Beta. You don't have to explain. I just want you to be happy." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a brief second, I saw regret in his eyes. But he turned away quickly. Perhaps he didn't want to face the truth of what he was doing. He placed the bag on the bed, said he'd visit soon, and walked toward the door. I followed him with my eyes as he stepped out, hoping he would look back just once. But he didn't. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, but that sound echoed inside my chest like 1,000 cracks forming all at once. When I was finally alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap. The room was quiet, too quiet. I took a long breath, letting the loneliness settle gently around me. And in that moment, I realized something painful but true. Sometimes a person's biggest heartbreak is not when they are sent away, but when the person they love the most doesn't fight for them to stay. That evening, as I sat near the small window of my new room, I watched the sun slowly sink behind the trees. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep shade of blue, and with each change of color, I felt my heart shifting too, softly breaking, quietly accepting. The garden outside was peaceful. A few other elderly women walked slowly along the path, some with sticks, some holding each other's hands like old-school friends. I wondered if they had stories like mine, stories of homes they once built, families they once held together, children they once loved more than their own breath. Did they also come here because someone at home needed space? Did they also hear the pain of decisions spoken softly but felt loudly? For the first time, I didn't feel entirely alone. Pain connects people in strange, silent ways. A nurse knocked gently on my door and asked if I needed anything. I smiled and thanked her. She left with a kind nod, and I realized how different kindness feels when it comes from a stranger. It heals you, but it also reminds you that the people who should have been kind to you weren't. After a while, I lay down on the bed, clutching the edge of the blanket. I closed my eyes and thought of my son, his first steps, his first school day, the nights I stayed awake during his fevers, the sacrifices I made without ever counting them. And now, here I was, counting the hours since he left me at this place. A tear slipped down my cheek, not because I was angry, but because the world had changed too fast, and I wasn't ready for it. Before sleeping, I whispered a small prayer, not for myself, but for my son and his home. I prayed that he would never face the loneliness I was feeling tonight. I prayed that one day he would understand what it feels like when the person you love most slowly lets go of your hand. I prayed that his heart never shatters the way mine had shattered today. As the night grew deeper, I hugged my pillow like a child, letting the quietness of the room wrap around me. Somewhere in that silence, I realized a simple truth. Sometimes life doesn't break you in one moment, it breaks you in small, quiet ways, through small, quiet goodbyes, until you finally sit in a room that isn't yours, trying to make peace with a life you didn't choose. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The room was still dim, and the silence was thick, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for days. I sat up slowly, listening to the faint sounds of the staff preparing breakfast somewhere down the hallway. A bird chirped outside my window, and for a moment, it reminded me of the mornings in my own courtyard, the sound of sparrows, the smell of tea boiling on the stove, and the familiar comfort of routine. Here, everything felt new, unfamiliar, and somehow distant from the life I had lived for so long. Yet, I told myself, if this is where I am now, then I must learn to breathe again. Because even when the world changes around you, the heart still searches for a way to survive. After freshening up, I walked slowly outside to the garden. The sun was warm, and a few elderly men and women were sitting on benches, reading or quietly talking. One of them, an old woman with silver hair tied neatly in a bun, smiled at me. Her smile was gentle, like she understood everything without needing to ask. She came closer and said softly, "First day here?" I nodded, unable to hide the heaviness in my eyes. She held my hand and said, "Don't worry. I know it hurts. I cried for weeks when I first came. But you will learn to live again, trust me." Her words touched something deep inside me because they came from a place of experience, not pity. We sat together on a bench, and she told me little pieces of her story. Her children lived abroad, and over time, visits became rare. One day, she simply realized she was living alone inside her own home. "Loneliness," she said, "is heavier than any suitcase, heavier than any care home room." Her honesty comforted me. It made me feel less ashamed of my own sadness. Sometimes all a person needs is to feel understood, even by a stranger. As we talked, I felt the tightness in my chest loosen just a little. The world around me didn't feel quite as cold. I realized that this place, though unfamiliar, wasn't cruel. It was filled with people like me, people who had lived full lives, who had loved deeply, and who were now trying to understand where they fit in the world. I looked up at the sky and whispered in my heart, maybe this is the beginning of something new. Not perfect, not chosen, but new. And just as I started to breathe a little easier, I heard the sound of footsteps rushing toward me. A staff member approached with a gentle urgency and said, "Auntie, someone is waiting to see you at the front desk." My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I wondered, could it be my son? Did he come back for me? A small hope rose inside me, fragile but alive, as I slowly stood up and walked toward the entrance. As I walked toward the front desk, my heartbeat grew faster, almost painful, as if every thump carried a question I was afraid to ask. My steps were slow, careful, almost trembling. Hope is a strange thing. It can lift you to the sky, and it can crush you in a moment. And right then, that tiny hope inside me whispered again and again, maybe he came back, maybe he realized, maybe he needs his mother. When I turned the corner and saw a figure standing near the desk, my breath caught. For a second, I felt the world pause. But then, the figure turned, and my heart fell quietly inside my chest. It wasn't my son. It was Farida, my childhood friend, the one who had lived just a street away from me for most of my life. She hurried toward me, her face filled with worry and sadness, and wrapped her arms around me the moment she reached me. I closed my eyes and let myself lean into her embrace, feeling a comfort I had been craving for days. Farida held my shoulders and said softly, "I came as soon as I heard." "Why didn't you tell me?" I forced a small smile and replied, "Because I didn't want you to see me like this." Her eyes filled with tears as she cupped my face. "You've spent your whole life taking care of others. When did you decide you weren't allowed to be taken care of?" Her words broke something inside me, a wall I had built to keep my pain from spilling into the world. For the first time since arriving here, I let myself cry openly, without hiding, without pretending to be strong. Farida held my hand, and we sat down on a small bench near the reception. "You are not alone," she whispered. "Not now. Not ever." We talked for a long time. I told her everything, the silence, the tension, the phone call, the final conversation, the moment I walked out of my home. She listened without interrupting, her eyes soft and full of understanding. When I finished, she said gently, "Sometimes children grow up and forget that the roots they stand on have feelings too." I lowered my eyes, unsure of what to say. "Do you want me to talk to him?" she asked. I shook my head. No, if he wanted to understand, he would have understood on his own. She sighed deeply and squeezed my hand. "You deserve love that doesn't need reminders," she said. Before leaving, Farida pressed a small bag into my hands. "Some of your favorite snacks. And a shawl. I know you get cold at night." I smiled, touched beyond words. As she walked away, I felt a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt since I left my home. Sometimes, family is not only made by blood, it is made by the people who show up when the world turns its back on you. When I returned to my room, the evening light was soft, and the room felt a little less empty. I placed the shawl on my bed, ran my fingers over its familiar fabric, and breathed in its comforting scent. For the first time in many days, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I felt seen. I felt remembered. And even though my son had not returned, a quiet voice inside me whispered, "Life still has small kindnesses waiting for you." That night, I fell asleep with a calmness I hadn't known in a very long time, because even in the midst of heartbreak, love had found its way back to me, through the door of an old friend who still remembered who I was. The next day began quietly, with a soft morning breeze slipping through the small gap in my window. I wrapped Farida's shawl around my shoulders and felt a gentle comfort, as if the fabric itself carried a reminder that I was still loved somewhere in this world. I walked out to the garden again, breathing slowly, trying to let the peace around me settle into my heart. The old woman I had met before waved at me, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the courage to smile back. Maybe this place wasn't meant to replace my home, but maybe it could hold a little piece of peace for me, at least for now. As I sat on the bench, watching the morning sunlight dance across the leaves, a young staff member approached me with a warm expression and said, "Auntie, your son called. He said he will come in a few days." For a moment, I froze. A few days. Not today. Not even tomorrow. Just someday soon. I nodded gently, thanking her, but inside, something tightened, not out of anger, but out of quiet acceptance. A child who truly misses his mother does not postpone visits. A child who truly worries does not need reminders. I whispered to myself, maybe he's busy. Maybe life is heavy for him too. But deep down, another voice whispered a truth I could no longer ignore. You are no longer his priority. I spent the rest of the morning walking slowly across the garden, feeling the small stones under my feet, listening to the distant laughter of other residents. Some of them seemed so comfortable here, as if they had learned to build new lives from old pieces. I wondered if I could do the same. Could a mother who gave her whole life to her child now learn to live for herself, even a little? Could I find meaning again, even after everything I had lost? That question stayed with me like a soft echo. In the afternoon, I joined a small group in the lounge where a few residents were sharing stories. One man talked about his days as a teacher. Another woman spoke about her grandchildren who lived abroad. As I listened, I realized that none of us were here because we were unwanted. We were here because life had changed around us, and we were trying to find our place again. Just like me. When I returned to my room later that day, I felt something new, something quiet but powerful. Strength. Not the loud, bold kind, but the kind that grows slowly inside a hurting heart. I sat by the window and whispered to myself, maybe my story isn't ending here. Maybe it's only changing. The sun began to set again, painting the sky with soft colors, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't pray for my old life back. Instead, I prayed for peace in the life I had now. And as night settled over the care home, I felt a gentle shift inside me, like the beginning of healing, like the first step toward accepting a truth I had tried to avoid for so long. Sometimes a mother's journey continues even when her child's does not walk beside hers anymore. The next morning felt different. There was a softness in the air, a kind of calm that touched my heart in a gentle way. Maybe it was the way the sunlight entered my room, or maybe it was the way my mind had finally stopped fighting with the things I could not change. I wrapped the shawl around my shoulders again and sat at the edge of my bed for a long moment, letting the quiet settle inside me. For the first time, I wasn't waking up with the same heavy ache in my chest. The pain was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It felt like a bruise, still tender, still real, but not as sharp as before. Maybe healing starts in small ways, I thought to myself. After breakfast, I joined a small activity in the common hall where a few residents were painting simple pictures. A staff member handed me a blank sheet and some colors. At first, I hesitated, my hands trembled slightly, unsure if I could even draw a straight line. But then I remembered how much joy simple things used to bring me long ago. With a slow breath, I lifted the brush and made the first stroke. It was uneven, shaky, almost childlike. But as I continued, something inside me softened. The colors began to form a small rose, nothing perfect, nothing grand, but a rose still. A symbol of what I used to grow in my garden, before life changed. The nurse who passed by smiled and said, "Auntie, that's beautiful." I looked at her surprised, because it didn't feel beautiful to me. But then I realized her words were more than a compliment. They were a reminder that even imperfect things can still hold meaning. Even broken hearts can still create something gentle. For the first time since leaving my home, I felt a tiny spark of pride inside me, fragile but real. Later in the afternoon, I went for a walk in the garden again. The old woman with silver hair joined me, holding my arm gently. We walked slowly, talking about small things: the weather, the flowers, the days that once felt fuller. She listened to me with sincere warmth, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't said aloud in years. "I thought my life was over when I came here," I admitted. She nodded knowingly and said, "My dear, life doesn't end. It just changes shape. And so must we." Her words stayed with me as we walked among the blooming plants. I stopped near a small rose bush, its petals opening softly in the sunlight. Something about it touched me deeply. Roses grow with thorns, yet they still bloom. They still bring beauty. They still stand tall in the morning light. I reached out and touched one of the petals, whispering to myself, maybe I can bloom again too, even here. When I returned to my room, I placed my small painting of the rose on the table beside my bed. It looked simple, humble, but it felt like a symbol of something I had regained. Maybe a quiet strength, maybe a piece of myself. And as the day came to a close, I realized something important. I was beginning to accept my new life, not because I had forgotten the past, but because I finally understood that holding on too tightly to what hurt me would only keep me from healing. That night, as I lay in my bed, I whispered softly into the darkness, "I am still here, and I am still trying." And for the first time in a long while, those words didn't feel like surrender, they felt like hope.